Hey everyone, welcome to video 4 of the series on using Unity Animator controllers with the NeoFPS Firearms system. In this video, we're going to be looking at animation layers. So one of the big weaknesses, or one of the things that's quite tricky with Animator controllers, and which procedural animation makes much easier, is blending together different animations at the same time. Any one of these states in an Animator controller is an atomic operation. Essentially, you can be in this state, or you can be in this state, or you can be transitioning between the two, but that's it. You can't be drawing the weapon and reloading at the same time. That just wouldn't work. And the way that you get around this is by using animation layers. So, as an example, here we're looking at the Animator controller for the assault rifle. Now, every Animator controller has a base layer. That's what we've been looking at in the previous videos, and that's what we see here. If you just create a controller and start adding states and transitions, you're adding them to the base layer. But here, in this controller, we have an extra layer called trigger. And this is very simple. This is just an idle state, which is the standard idle pose. And then we have an any state transition here into fire. So this is just simply checking the fire condition. No exit time and instantaneous, so just like with the pistol. However, it's within this layer only. We also have an any state transition to trigger hold. So this is similar. 0 transition duration, no exit time, but instead of the trigger parameter, we're using this trigger hold boolean parameter. So that's the one. It's got a square box instead of a circle, so you can tell the difference. And essentially, we transition out of fire as soon as it's completed. So once exit time hits 1 down here, that's the only condition. Whereas with this one, we don't worry about the exit time. Instead, we look at this condition here, which says trigger hold boolean is now set to false. So as long as that boolean is true, we'll be looping in this trigger hold animation, which is, as you would imagine, dead simple. It's just the trigger pulled back and the fingers. So if we switch between the two, trigger forwards, trigger down. That's all it is. But because we're doing this on a separate layer, this layer can run in parallel to the base layer. And the reason you might want this is that here, we don't want the base layer to interrupt the trigger. If you hold your mouse button, the character should hold the trigger down, regardless of what the gun actually is doing. It's then up to the firearm modules to decide whether or not to actually fire. Now, the other thing that's necessary to make this one work, if you see this M here, this means that we have a mask applied, an avatar mask. If you click on the little cog, then we can see the layer options. The weight is just the strength of this layer blending on top of the base. So if you set this to 0, you wouldn't see any effect of it whatsoever. And then as you raise this up and down, it blends in the effect of whatever animation is happening within this layer. The avatar mask is specifying which parts of this animated object this layer actually affects. And here we have an avatar mask called Assault Rifle Trigger. And this avatar mask, if I can inspect it, and we expand the transforms, is heavily cut down. It's just the trigger transform on the firearm itself. And then if we expand out the character skeleton, and work out down the hand, then this is just the different finger bones here. All of these other bones aren't affected. And this means that whatever animation is playing on the base layer using those bones will be completely untouched. However, what's playing on the base layer with the bones enabled in that mask will be overridden by this layer. Which brings us to the next option, which is blending. Do we override, or is this additive? We'll actually look at an example of an additive layer in the next video. But the way they work is by comparing the animation in the clips for this layer to a reference pose. This is a neutral pose, and then instead of setting the transform positions and rotations to those in the clip, it compares those transforms to the reference pose. It works out the difference between the two, and then it adds that difference to the results of the layers below. An example might be something like a breathing animation, where the weapon bobs slightly. Using an additive layer would allow that bob to layer over the top of the regular reloading and shooting animations and the like, affecting the same transforms but not overriding them. So that's additive blending. Other options include sync. So this is used for syncing up an instance of another layer with different animations applied. An example of this might be if you have a regular set of weapon animations, your reload, shooting, raise and lower, and you also have an injured set of weapon animations. You would create a layer that syncs with your base layer. You won't then be able to add new states or transitions to this layer, but you can change the clips to use your injured animation clips. And you would then use the weight property to blend from your regular animations to your injured ones based on health or something like that. The current state, current transition, and so on will be synced between the two layers. The timing option next to sync defines what happens if the animations in your sync layer are a different length to the source layers. If this is switched off, then the sync layer animations will be squashed or stretched to match the source layer. If it's switched on, then that exposes a weight slider that you can use to bias that squash and stretch to the sync layer or to the source layer. And lastly, IK pass is used if you want foot, hand, or head IK for this layer. This requires you to have a monobehavior on the same object as the animator component that implements an onAnimator IK method, where you can calculate IK points using raycasts, proxy objects, and so on, and then send those to the animator. If none of your layers have this switched on, or they do, but their layer weight is set to 0, then the onAnimator IK method will never be called. And there we go. So that's one example of layers. Let's have a look at something a little bit more involved. So here we have the revolver, and this one has a trigger pull layer. But this one works a little bit differently to the assault rifle. So here we have the trigger pull clip. And if we look at this, it's just a single frame loop. Hitting play and it doesn't have any real animation. This is just the trigger all the way back and the hammer pulled down, and this also actually has the drum rotated one bullet. And the way that this is used is that the charged trigger component on the revolver, so this uses the layer weight to set the charge. Layer index 1, so here the base layer is layer 0, here we have layer 1. And essentially as the trigger is charged, so you hold down the mouse button, we are just blending the weight here from 0 up to 1, which means the trigger slowly pulls back, the drum rotates, and the hammer pulls back too. And then the moment the gun fires, we just reset this to 0, so it will snap back to how it was. And the reason that you might want to do it this way, instead of simply having a keyframe animation of the trigger pulling back and the drum rotating and things like that, is that it gives you a little bit more flexibility. It allows you to combine that with other animations, like the movement of the hand or idle and things like that. But it also allows you to change the speed, including going in reverse. Because this blend is controlled by code, we can change how long the trigger takes to charge. We can change how long it takes to uncharge if you release the trigger early. Does it immediately snap back, or does it quickly move back, or does it go very slowly, and things like that. So this is just one little trick that you can keep in mind, keep in your repertoire. Just think of different ways to solve the problems that you might come across while you're trying to model all these different firearm behaviors. If you're not an accomplished animator, then it's much easier to just create a static pose with a trigger back and drum rotated one bullet that you can blend in than it is to create a smooth animation. And it allows you to add that extra bit of flexibility to tweak things later when balancing your weapons and things like that. Anyhow, I hope that was helpful. Any comments or questions, just hop on the Discord and say hi. The next video, we're going to be looking at blend trees. So I'll see you there. Cheers.